After I said no, my entitled brother sent his kids to my address in a taxi. But he didn't know I'd moved. And the person who did live there made one single phone call that unleashed the consequences my brother never saw coming. My name is Kendra, and at 34 years old I am a senior risk analyst for one of the largest investment firms in Atlanta. My entire career is built on calculating probabilities, assessing threats, and mitigating damage before it happens. But the biggest liability in my life has never been a fluctuating market or an unstable merger. It was my older brother Marcus. Yesterday, Marcus decided to gamble with his own children's safety because he refused to believe the word no. He packed his 3 kids into an Uber and sent them to my doorstep so he could jet off to Napa Valley for a luxury anniversary weekend he definitely could not afford. He thought he was calling my bluff. He thought I would cave like I always used to. But what Marcus did not know was that I sold that house 3 months ago. He did not know that a 60-year-old Marine colonel with a zero-tolerance policy lives there now. And he certainly did not expect that his arrogance would lead to him landing in handcuffs the moment his plane touched down in California. If you have ever been the family doormat who finally decided to become a concrete wall, the nightmare began at 5:00 a.m. on a humid Atlanta Thursday. I was already awake standing in my walk-in closet staring at my open Toomey suitcase. My flight to London was scheduled to depart from Hartsfield-Jackson at 1:00 p.m. This was not a vacation. I was leading the due diligence team on a $5 million merger that my firm had been courting for 8 months. My career hung on this weekend. The silence of my apartment was shattered by the aggressive buzzing of my phone on the Marble Island. I knew who it was before I even looked. Only one person in my life had the audacity to call before sunrise without a text first. Marcus? I let it ring 3 times debating whether to ignore it, but my risk assessment brain kicked in. If I ignored him, he would just keep calling or worse show up. I swiped answer and put it on speaker while I folded a silk blouse. Kendra, you are awake good. Marcus did not say hello. He never did. Listen, Becky and I finally booked that Napa trip for our 10th anniversary. The flight leaves at noon, so I'm going to need you to take the kids for the weekend. We will drop them off around 4 p.m. Make sure you stock up on those organic snacks Ruby likes. She is going through a phase where she refuses to eat anything with red dye 40. I stopped folding. The sheer entitlement in his voice was not new, but it still had the power to stun me. He was not asking. He was informing me. This was the Marcus method. He created a crisis or a plan and then assigned roles to everyone else, assuming we would just fall in line to support the main character of the family. Marcus? I said, my voice calm and flat. I cannot watch the kids. I am leaving for London in a few hours for work. I will not be in the country. He laughed. A dismissive short sound that grated on my nerves. Stop lying, Kendra. Mom told me you finished that big project last week. You are just trying to get out of it because you hate Becky. Look, I do not have time for your little grudges. The tickets are non-refundable, and this trip cost me $3,000. I am not losing that money just because you want to be difficult. I tightened my grip on the edge of the suitcase. $3,000. He had $3,000 for a wine tasting trip, but last month he had called me begging for $500 to fix the transmission on his lease because he was short on cash. I am not lying, Marcus, I said. And even if I was in Atlanta, the answer would still be no. I am not your nanny. You did not ask me in advance. You cannot just dump 3 children on me with 0 notice. We did not ask in advance because we wanted to surprise each other, he said, as if that made sense. Look, it is just 3 days. You have that big house all to yourself. It is pathetic, really. All those empty bedrooms and no family to fill them. The kids will bring some life into that mausoleum. Just do this for me. We are family. Family helps family. That word, family. It was the weapon they always used to bludgeon me into submission. Growing up, I was always the one expected to sacrifice. When Marcus wanted to go to basketball camp, my parents drained my college fund to pay for it because he had potential. When he needed a car, they gave him theirs and told me to take the bus. Now as adults, I was the one with a 6-figure salary and the investment portfolio. While Marcus was bouncing between sales jobs he felt were beneath him. Yet somehow I was still the one who owed him. I took a deep breath. Marcus listened to me very carefully. I am not at that house. I am going to the airport. Do not bring the kids there. There is no one home to let them in. He sighed loud and exaggerated. You are so dramatic. Fine, play your games. I will just tell the kids to wait on the porch until you stop pouting and open the door. We are sending them in an Uber because we are running late for our flight. They will be there at 4 p.m. Do not make them wait outside too long, Kendra. It is supposed to rain. He hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar rise of blood pressure that only my family could trigger. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I was physically sitting in my 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs holding a grudge. He had no idea that I had sold that house 3 months ago. I had not told anyone, not my parents Otis and Viola, and certainly not Marcus. The decision had been made after the Super Bowl incident 6 months prior. I had been away at a conference in Chicago, and Marcus had used the emergency key I gave our parents to let himself into my house. He threw a party. A rowdy, drunken party for his fantasy football league. When I came home, my Italian leather sofa was stained with red wine, and a hole had been punched in the drywall of my guest bathroom. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said I was being materialistic. When I asked him to pay for the damages, my parents intervened. "He is your brother Kendra," my mother Viola had scolded me. "He just wanted to show off your success to his friends. You should be flattered. Besides, you have insurance. Why are you trying to bankrupt him over a couch?" That was the moment the switch flipped. I realized they did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. An ATM with a pulse. A safety net that would always catch them no matter how recklessly they jumped. So I quietly listed the house. In this market, it sold in 2 days to a cash buyer. I moved into a high-security penthouse in Midtown Atlanta. The building had a doorman biometric entry and a policy that required guests to be announced. It was a fortress. And I put the deed in the name of an LLC so my name would not appear on public records. I disappeared in plain sight. I continued to text them and email them as usual, but I never invited them over. I met them at restaurants or at their house. They were so self-absorbed, they never even asked why I stopped hosting Sunday dinners. And now Marcus was sending his children, Leo who was 9, Maya who was 7, and little Ruby who was 5 to a house I no longer owned. I looked at the clock. 5:15 a.m. I had a choice. I could call him back, scream until he listened and save him from his own stupidity. Or, I could let him touch the stove he insisted on touching. I chose the middle ground, the legal ground. I opened the family group chat. The one named Williams Family Unity that my mother had created. I typed a message clearly and precisely: Marcus. I am writing this so there is a record. I am currently at the airport flying to London for work. I do not live at the Maple Street address anymore. Do not send the children there. I am not available to watch them. If you abandon them at that location, you are solely responsible for whatever happens. This is my final notice. I hit send. Almost immediately the bubbles appeared. My mother was the first to respond. "Kendra, stopped this nonsense. Your brother needs this break. Becky has been so stressed lately. Just cancel your little trip or whatever you are doing. Family comes first. You can go to London anytime." Then, my father Otis. "You are being incredibly selfish. We raised you better than this. Help your brother. He is the father of your niece and nephews. Do not be spiteful. Just because you are jealous of his family life. Jealous." That was their favorite narrative. That I, the career woman with the overflowing passport and the heavy 401k, was secretly dying of jealousy over Marcus's life. Marcus, who was 37 years old and still asked our parents to pay his cell phone bill. Marcus, who was married to Becky, a woman who once told me that my job was cute but ultimately meaningless because I did not have a husband to validate me. I read their messages and felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. They did not believe me. They truly believed I was lying about being out of town just to spite them. They thought if they bullied me enough, I would magically materialize at the old house and open the door. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the chat timestamped and saved it to my cloud drive. Then I finished packing. At 10 a.m., my car service arrived. As I rode in the back of the black SUV watching the Atlanta skyline drift by, I checked the chat one last time. Marcus had posted a photo. It was him and Becky at the airport holding glasses of champagne in the Delta Sky Club. The caption read, "Anniversary mode activated Napa. Here we come. Thanks to Auntie Kendra for holding down the fort with the kiddos." He was establishing his public narrative. He was making it look like I had agreed, so that if anything went wrong he could say I flaked. He was setting me up to be the villain. I turned off my notifications. I arrived at the international terminal, breezed through security thanks to my TSA pre-check, and settled into the lounge. I ordered a glass of Chardonnay and opened my laptop to review the merger files. At 12:03 p.m., my flight began boarding. I walked down the jet bridge, my phone in my hand. I had one moment of hesitation. Those were my niece and nephews. They were innocent. If Marcus actually went through with this, they would be terrified. But I could not save them from their parents forever. If I caved now, if I called the police myself or rushed back to intercept them, I would be proving Marcus right. I would be proving that his lack of planning was my emergency. I would be proving that no matter what I said, my no actually meant yes if you push hard enough. I stepped onto the plane and found my seat in the business class cabin. The flight attendant offered me a hot towel. "Can I get you anything to drink before we take off?" she asked. "Sparkling water, please," I said. I pulled out my phone one last time. No missed calls from Marcus. He was probably already in the air flying west while I flew east. He was confident. He was relaxed. He was probably telling Becky right now that I was a pain, but I always came through in the end. I switched my phone to airplane mode. The signal bars vanished. The connection was severed. At 4:00 p.m. Atlanta time, I would be somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping champagne and reading a report on market volatility. And at 4:00 p.m., Atlanta time, an Uber driver would be pulling up to 452 Maple Street. Marcus thought he was sending his kids to their pushover auntie. He did not know he was sending them to Colonel Johnson. I had met the Colonel during the closing of the house sale. He was a man who ironed his jeans. A man who looked you in the eye and crushed your hand when he shook it. He had moved to Atlanta to be closer to the VA hospital, and he valued two things above all else: order and discipline. He had told me specifically, "I bought this place because it has a fence and I don't like uninvited guests." I closed my eyes and leaned back as the plane taxied down the runway. The engines roared, pushing me back into my seat. There was no turning back now. The wheels lifted off the tarmac. I was gone. And Marcus was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. While I was settling into my lie flat seat over the Atlantic Ocean, enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you have done everything right, my brother Marcus was on the ground in Atlanta, executing a plan so flawed it bordered on delusional. It was 4:00 p.m., the exact time he had threatened to drop off his children. According to the police report and the Uber driver's statement I later read, Marcus and Becky were running late. Of course they were. They were always running late, because they lived their lives assuming the world would wait for them. They stood on the curb of their rented townhouse in Buckhead, surrounded by luggage that looked expensive but was likely bought on credit. Becky was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, looking every bit the part of a woman heading to Napa for a wine tasting she felt she deserved. The three children, Leo, Maya, and Ruby, stood next to them clutching their backpacks. They looked small and confused. They knew something was wrong. Children always know. They had heard the arguments, the frantic phone calls, the way their father's voice rose an octave when he was lying. Marcus checked his watch and cursed. The Uber he had ordered for himself and Becky to go to the airport was 5 minutes away, but the Uber he had ordered for the kids had just pulled up. It was a dark gray sedan driven by a college student named Tariq, who probably thought he was just picking up a standard fare. Marcus opened the back door of the sedan and started shoving the kids inside. "Get in," he snapped. "Leo, you sit in the middle. Make sure Ruby is buckled." Becky stood by, checking her makeup in her compact mirror, completely disengaged from the fact that she was sending her children across town to a house where she had been told exactly, and explicitly, no one would be. "I still do not understand why Kendra has to be so difficult," Becky complained, snapping the compact shut. "She knows we have been planning this for months. She makes everything about her. It is just 3 days. You would think we asked her to donate a kidney." "She will get over it," Marcus said, slamming the car door shut once Ruby was inside. "She always does. Kendra likes to play the victim. She wants us to beg, but once the kids are there, she will cave. She is not going to leave her own flesh and blood on the porch." He leaned into the open window to talk to the driver. "Listen, man, the destination is 452 Maple Street. It is about 40 minutes out with traffic. My sister is waiting for them. Just drop them in the driveway. She will come out to get them. Here is a 20 for your trouble." He tossed a crumpled $20 bill onto the passenger seat. Tariq looked hesitant. He looked at the 3 kids in the back seat, then back at Marcus. "You are not coming with them, sir." "No," Marcus said, checking his phone again. "We have a flight to catch. Their aunt is expecting them. Just drive." Tariq nodded slowly, not paid enough to argue with a man in a linen suit who looked like he was about to explode. He rolled up the window and pulled away from the curb. Inside the car, the atmosphere was heavy. Leo, the oldest, at 9 years old, stared out the window. He was a smart kid, too smart for his own good sometimes. He remembered the last time they went to Aunt Kendra's house. He remembered the yelling. He remembered his dad breaking the wall. He had a knot in his stomach that felt like a stone. "Are we going to see Auntie Kendra?" little Ruby asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Yes," Leo said quietly, but he did not sound sure. As the car navigated the snarled traffic of I-85, the sky above Atlanta began to bruise. It was that time of year when the heat and humidity collided to form violent afternoon thunderstorms. The clouds turned a menacing shade of charcoal gray, and the wind began to whip the trees lining the highway. By the time the Uber turned onto Maple Street, the first drops of rain were hitting the windshield fat and heavy. Tariq slowed down, squinting at the house numbers. The neighborhood was quiet. It was a transitional area, the kind where older bungalows were being bought up and renovated by young professionals. 452 Maple Street looked different than the kids remembered. When I lived there, the lawn was soft and green, bordered by hydrangeas. I had a wreath on the door and a welcome mat that said, "Come in and cozy up." Now the house looked austere. The grass was cut military short. The hydrangeas were gone, replaced by severe thorny hedges that lined the walkway like a security perimeter. The front windows were covered by heavy blackout blinds. There was no wreath. There was no welcome mat. There was just a sign on the gate that read, "No trespassing." Tariq pulled into the driveway. "This is it, kids," he said. He unlocked the doors. Leo looked at the house. It was dark, completely dark, neatly. There were no lights on the porch, no warm glow from the living room window. "Is Auntie Kendra home?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "She must be," Leo said, trying to be the big brother. Dad said she was. They climbed out of the car, dragging their little rolling suitcases behind them. The rain was falling harder now, a steady drum beat against the pavement. Tariq popped the trunk and set their heavier bags on the concrete. "You guys okay?" he asked, looking at the dark house. "Yeah," Leo said. "We are fine." Tariq hesitated for a second, but he had another ride queued up, and the man in the linen suit had been so confident. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving 3 children standing on the sidewalk as the sky opened up. The storm broke with a crack of thunder that shook the ground. "Run to the porch," Leo yelled, grabbing Ruby's hand. They sprinted up the driveway, dragging their luggage, the wheels clattering loudly. They scrambled up the steps to the front porch, seeking shelter from the deluge. The overhang protected them from the worst of the rain, but the wind was blowing it sideways, soaking their clothes. Leo stepped up to the door. It was painted a high-gloss black, now not the cheerful red I had chosen. He reached out and rang the doorbell. They waited. Silence. He rang it again. Longer this time. Nothing. "Maybe she is in the shower," Maya suggested, hugging her arms around herself. It was getting cold, the temperature dropping rapidly with the storm. Leo pounded on the door with his fist. "Auntie Kendra. It is us. Open up." Inside the house, Colonel Johnson was in his study at the back of the house, cleaning his service pistol. He was a man who appreciated silence. He had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, serving tours in places most people only saw on the news. He had seen things that made him value security above all else. He lived alone. He liked it that way. When he heard the pounding, he did not think visitors. He thought threat. He had bought this house specifically because the previous owner, a woman named Kendra, had installed the top-of-the-line security system. He checked the monitor on his desk. The camera feed showed 3 figures on his porch, but because of the heavy rain and the angle of the camera lens, which was obscured by water droplets, he could not make out details. He just saw shapes. And then he saw one of them reaching for something. Leo was reaching for the door handle, trying to see if it was unlocked. The colonel stood up. He did not grab the pistol. That was for life or death. He grabbed the aluminum baseball bat he kept by the door. He moved through the hallway with the silent grace of a predator. He did not turn on the lights. He wanted the element of surprise. On the porch, the kids were crying. Ruby was wailing full volume, now terrified by the thunder. Maya was shivering her teeth, chattering. Leo was banging on the door with both fists, panic rising in his throat. "Dad said she would be here," he shouted over the wind. "He promised." Suddenly the deadbolt clicked. It was a loud mechanical sound that cut through the noise of the storm. The kids froze. The door swung inward. Leo looked up, expecting to see his Aunt Kendra, maybe in her pajamas, maybe angry, but there. Instead, he saw a giant. Colonel Johnson filled the doorway. He was 6'4" with shoulders that blocked out the dim light from the hallway. A jagged scar ran down the left side of his face from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah. He wore a tight black t-shirt and tactical cargo pants, and in his right hand he held a silver baseball bat gripped tight, ready to swing. "Who goes there?" The colonel roared, his voice like gravel in a mixer. The kids screamed. It was a primal, terrified sound that echoed down the street. Maya dropped to her knees, covering her head. Ruby tried to hide behind Leo. Leo, to his credit, stood his ground, though his legs were shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Please," he squeaked, "please do not hurt us." The colonel blinked. He lowered the bat. His eyes adjusted to the gloom of the porch. He looked down. He did not see intruders. He did not see a threat. He saw 3 soaking wet, terrified children. One of them clutching a stuffed rabbit that was dripping water. He saw the suitcases. He saw the way the oldest boy was trying to shield his sisters. The colonel's face changed. The warrior mask dropped away and was replaced by something else. Confusion. And then horror. What in God's name, he muttered. He stepped back and flipped the porch light on. The sudden illumination revealed the children in stark relief. They were shivering, blue-lipped, and looking at him like he was the boogeyman. "Who are you?" The colonel asked, his voice significantly softer but still commanding. "I am Leo," the boy stammered. "This is Maya and Ruby. We are looking for our Aunt Kendra." "Kendra," the colonel repeated. "Kendra Williams." "Yes, sir," Leo said. "She lives here. Our dad sent us." The colonel looked at the suitcases, then out at the empty street where the Uber had long since vanished. He looked at the storm raging around them. "Kendra Williams does not live here, son," he said grimly. "I bought this house 3 months ago." The color drained from Leo's face. But Dad said." "Your dad is wrong," the colonel said. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Get in here now, before you catch pneumonia." The kids hesitated. They had been taught stranger danger. But the man had put the bat down, and the wind was howling like a banshee. "Move it, soldiers," the colonel barked, not unkindly. "Inside. Double time." They shuffled inside, dripping water all over the hardwood floors that Marcus had once stained with wine. The colonel kicked the door shut and locked it. He looked at the 3 of them standing in his foyer, puddles forming around their feet. He was a man who hated disorder. He hated mess. But looking at these abandoned children, he felt a rage building in his gut that had nothing to do with wet floors. Someone had dropped 3 minors at a stranger's house in the middle of a storm and drove away. "Where are your parents?" the colonel asked. "They went to the airport," Leo whispered. "They are going to Napa." "The airport," the colonel repeated. He looked at the clock on the wall. 4:15 p.m. He did not ask for Kendra's number. He did not ask to call their parents. He knew exactly what this situation was. In the Corps, they called it a dereliction of duty. In the civilian world, it was a crime. He walked over to the landline on the wall. He picked up the receiver and dialed 3 numbers, 9 to 1-1. "Operator, this is Colonel Samuel Johnson at 4.52 Maple Street," he said, his eyes never leaving the shivering children. "I need police and child protective services at my location immediately. I have 3 abandoned minors on my premises. Their parents have fled the state." He hung up the phone and looked at Leo. "Sit down, son," he said, pointing to the bench by the door. "The police are coming. You are safe now." But he knew they were not safe. Not really. Because the real danger wasn't the storm outside. It was the parents who had left them in it. And Colonel Johnson was about to make sure those parents paid for every single raindrop on his floor. The Atlantic Ocean was a vast, indifferent expanse beneath me. A perfect mirror to the calm I felt inside. At 35,000 feet, sipping sparkling water in a lie-flat seat, I was disconnected from the chaos I had left behind in Atlanta. But on the ground, the storm I had predicted, the one Marcus had arrogantly assumed he could weather, was making landfall with devastating precision. It was 4:30 p.m. in Atlanta. The sky had turned a bruised purple, unleashing a torrential downpour typical of Georgia summers. But the flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement of Maple Street weren't from the storm. They were from 2 Atlanta Police Department cruisers and a Child Protective Services van parked haphazardly in front of my old house. Colonel Johnson stood on his porch, a towering figure, even without the baseball bat he had set aside. His arms were crossed over his chest, his face set in a grim line as he spoke to the responding officers. Behind him, inside the dry warmth of the foyer, my niece and nephew sat on a wooden bench wrapped in thick wool blankets the colonel had pulled from his emergency supplies. They were shivering, their eyes wide and red-rimmed, clutching mugs of hot cocoa he had hurriedly made. Officer Ramirez, rained, dripping from the brim of her hat, took notes as the colonel spoke. "I found them at 16 to 15 hours. Johnson said, his voice clipping with military precision, banging on the door, soaking wet, no adults in sight. "The boy Leo said they were dropped off by an Uber." "And they claimed their aunt lived here?" Ramirez asked. "Affirmative." Johnson nodded. "Kendra Williams, I bought this property from her entity 3 months ago. I have never met the family, but the paperwork is clear. She vacated the premises in May." Inside, a CPS caseworker named Mrs. Gable was kneeling in front of Leo. "Honey?" she asked gently. "Did your daddy say your aunt was inside?" Leo nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He said Auntie Kendra was being difficult, but she was home. He said just wait on the porch and she'd open the door. He said he had to catch a plane." "A plane?" Mrs. Gable exchanged a dark look with Officer Ramirez. "To Napa?" Maya piped up, her voice small. For their anniversary, Ramirez stepped out to her cruiser. Dispatch, we have a confirmed abandonment, 3 minors. Parents are Marcus and Rebecca Williams. They are reportedly on a flight to Napa Valley, California. I need you to contact the airlines immediately. Get me a flight number and a landing time. It didn't take long. Marcus, in his infinite need for validation, had posted his boarding pass on Facebook hours earlier. Delta Flight 452, to San Francisco. They're in the air, dispatch crackled back, landing at SFO in 2 hours. Contact SFO police. Ramirez ordered, her jaw tightening. Tell them to meet the welcoming committee at the gate. 3,000 miles away, the mood in the first-class cabin of Delta Flight 452 was celebratory. Marcus reclined his seat, a gin and tonic in hand, scrolling through the in-flight entertainment. Becky was flipping through a Vogue, already mentally planning her outfits for the vineyard tours. Do you think she let them in yet? Becky asked idly, not looking up. Marcus chuckled. Oh, definitely. She probably let them sit in the rain for 10 minutes just to prove a point. Kendra loves to play the martyr, but she's soft. She's probably making the mac and cheese right now and composing a long angry email to me. I'll delete it when we land. Good. Becky sighed. I don't want her drama ruining my trip. I need this, Marcus. The kids have been so exhausting lately. Relax, babe. Marcus said, patting her hand. It's handled. We are untouchable. He turned on his phone as the pilot announced their descent. Let's check in. Make the guys back home jealous. He opened Facebook and posted a selfie of them clinking glasses. Napa bound, peace out, ATL. Hashach, anniversary and Hashard, no kids, living the life. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus stood up, stretching his back. He grabbed his carry-on, feeling like the king of the world. He had outsmarted his sister, dumped his responsibilities, and was about to enjoy a 5-star vacation. They walked off the jet bridge and into the terminal. Marcus was busy typing a text to his mother, landed safely. Tell Kendra. Thanks again, when he noticed the crowd at the gate wasn't moving. There was a wall of blue uniforms blocking the exit. Excuse me, Marcus said, trying to push past a TSA agent. We have a car waiting. Marcus Williams. A deep voice boomed. Marcus looked up. A sergeant from the San Francisco Police Department was staring directly at him. 2 other officers flanked him, hands resting near their belts. Yeah, Marcus said, his smile faltering. Who's asking? And, Rebecca Williams? The sergeant asked, looking at Becky. I'm Becky, she said, confused. Is this about the luggage? Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the sergeant barked. What? Marcus laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Is this a joke? Did Troy set this up? Very funny, guys. Sir, this is not a prank. You are under arrest. The officer grabbed Marcus's wrist, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall of the terminal. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut before Marcus could even process the sensation. Ow, you're hurting me, Becky shrieked as another officer cuffed her. What is going on? We didn't do anything. You are being detained on a warrant from Fulton County, Georgia. The sergeant announced, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the other passengers. 3 counts of child abandonment in the 2nd degree, reckless endangerment. Child abandonment, Marcus shouted, struggling against the cuffs. Are you crazy? My kids are with my sister. She's babysitting them. Your sister doesn't live there, sir, the sergeant said coldly. You dropped your children off at the home of a Colonel Samuel Johnson. He called 911 when he found them shivering on his porch in a thunderstorm. The color drained from Marcus's face. No, that's a lie. She's lying. Kendra is playing games. She's inside. I know she is. The security footage says otherwise, the sergeant said. And right now your children are in the custody of Child Protective Services because you fled the state. The crowd of passengers, initially annoyed by the delay, was now filming. Dozens of phones were raised, capturing Marcus's face as it crumpled from arrogance to sheer panic. Kendra! Marcus screamed at the ceiling as if I could hear him from London. You did this. You set me up. Officers, call my sister. She's watching them. It's a mistake. The only mistake, the officer said, pushing Marcus forward, was thinking you could dump your kids like trash and go on vacation, as they were marched through the terminal in handcuffs. Becky sobbing loudly about her reputation, and Marcus yelling incoherent threats about lawsuits. The video was already being uploaded to TikTok. The caption read, Parents arrested at SFO after ditching kids for wine trip. It had been less than 6 hours since I ignored his call, and Marcus was right about one thing: he was definitely going to learn a lesson this weekend. Just not the one he expected. The moment the wheels of the British Airways jet touched the tarmac at Heathrow Airport, I felt a vibration in my handbag that did not stop. It was a relentless buzzing, A digital swarm of panic that signaled my peaceful disconnection was over. I had spent 8 hours in the air suspended in the luxury of silence, believing that I had successfully drawn a boundary that my brother would be forced to respect. I believed he would see my message, see the dark house, and turn around. I underestimated his stupidity. I waited until the plane taxied to the gate before pulling my phone out. The screen lit up with a kaleidoscope of notifications. 37 missed calls from my mother Viola. 22 from my father Otis. 14 from Marcus. And then a string of text messages that escalated from confusion to rage to sheer unadulterated panic. But the notification that made my blood run cold was not from my family. It was a voicemail from a number I did not recognize with a generic area code for Atlanta Government Services. Miss Williams, this is Detective Miller with the Atlanta Police Department Special Victims Unit. We have 3 minors in protective custody who were abandoned at a residence on Maple Street. Your name and number were found in their possession listed as the guardian. We need you to contact us immediately regarding the location of the parents Marcus and Rebecca Williams. Failure to respond could have legal implications. I sat in my seat as the other passengers stood up to retrieve their overhead luggage. The $5 million merger, the meetings with the London partners, the career milestone I had worked toward for 8 months, all of it evaporated in that instant. I was a risk analyst. I knew how to weigh costs. And I knew that if I stayed in London while my nieces and nephew were in the system, and my brother was being arraigned, I would lose control of the narrative. My parents would spin this, Marcus would lie. I needed to be in the room. I stood up and walked to the front of the plane, but instead of exiting toward customs, I stepped to the side and called my boss. I have a catastrophic family emergency involving the police, I said. My voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I cannot attend the closing, send Jonathan. I have to fly back to Atlanta immediately. My boss was furious, but he heard the steel in my tone. He knew I never flaked. He knew I never made excuses. If I was walking away from $5 million, it was because the building was burning down. I booked the next flight back. It cost me $6,000 for a last-minute seat. I did not care. I spent the return flight not sleeping but preparing. I called my personal attorney, David, calm, aggressive, and expensive, and told him to meet me at the Fulton County precinct. I organized my evidence, the screenshots, the emails, the deed transfer documents proving I did not own the house. When I landed in Atlanta 14 hours later, I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and running on pure fury. David met me at baggage claim. He was a shark in a charcoal suit, and he looked at me with the kind of professional sympathy reserved for clients whose families were liabilities. They are holding Marcus and Becky at the precinct. David briefed me as we walked to his car. They were arrested at SFO the moment they landed. They are being flown back now in custody. But your parents are already at the station. They are trying to get access to the grandchildren, but CPS is blocking them because the investigation is ongoing. We drove in silence to the station. The Atlanta humidity hit me like a wet towel when I stepped out of the car. The precinct was a drab brick building that smelled of stale coffee and misery. I smoothed my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked through the double doors. The waiting area was chaotic, and in the center of the chaos were Otis and Viola Williams. My parents did not look like concerned grandparents. They looked like offended royalty who had been asked to wait in line. My mother was wearing her Sunday church hat and clutching her pearls, pacing back and forth. My father was arguing with the desk sergeant, his voice booming with the entitlement of a man who had never been told no. When the heavy security door clicked open and I walked into the lobby, the noise stopped. My mother froze mid-step. Her eyes locked onto me, and for a second I expected relief. I expected her to run to me, to hug me, to thank me for coming back to help sort out this nightmare. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. There she is, my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. There is the reason for all of this. They did not ask about the kids. They did not ask about the kids who had stood in a thunderstorm terrified and abandoned. They charged at me. You did this. Viola screamed, rushing toward me. You evil, selfish girl. You set him up. You knew they were coming and you let this happen. I stood my ground. My hands clasped in front of me. I told him not to come, Mother. I told him I did not live there. I told him I was in London. You lied. Otis roared, lunging past my mother. You lied to trick him. You sold the house without telling us. Who does that? Who sells their home and hides it from their own flesh and blood? You wanted him to fail. You wanted him to get arrested. He was close now. Too close. I could smell the peppermint breath mints he always chewed to cover the smell of his cigars. He raised his hand. It was a reflex I remembered from childhood. A gesture of dominance meant to cow me into submission. He was going to slap me right there in the police station lobby. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye, daring him to do it. But he never made contact. David stepped between us smoothly, catching my father's wrist in midair. It was a gentle motion, but firm enough to stop Otis in his tracks. "Mr. Williams," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am Kendra's attorney. You are currently in a police station. If you touch my client, or even raise your voice at her again, I will have you arrested for assault and witness intimidation before you can blink. Do you understand me?" Otis snatched his arm back, looking shocked. He looked at the officers behind the desk, who were now watching us with keen interest. He adjusted his jacket, trying to regain his dignity, but he was shaking. "She ruined his life," Viola sobbed, clinging to Otis's arm. "Marcus is in handcuffs because of her. She is cold-blooded. She has no heart. How could you do this to your brother Kendra? He just wanted a vacation. He worked so hard. He worked so hard." I repeated, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue. "He has been unemployed for 2 years, Mother. He lives off Becky's credit cards and your pension. And he worked so hard that he could not be bothered to verify if his children had a safe place to stay before he flew across the country to drink wine." "Do not talk about him like that," Viola hissed. "He is a good father. A good father does not dump his children on a stranger's porch in a storm," I said, my voice rising just enough to carry. "A good father does not ignore 3 warnings. A good father does not get arrested at baggage claim because he was too busy taking selfies to answer the police." Detective Miller appeared at the doorway to the back offices. He was a tired-looking man with a notepad and a skeptical expression. "Ms. Williams?" he asked, looking at me. "Yes," I said, stepping around my parents. "We need a statement," the detective said, "and we need to clarify the custody situation. Your brother and his wife have just arrived. They are being processed now." I turned to follow him. Otis grabbed my elbow. "Kendra, listen to me. You have to fix this. You go in there and you tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you got the dates mixed up. Tell them you were supposed to be there but your flight got delayed. If you take the blame, they will let Marcus go. It will be a civil dispute, not a criminal one." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the request took my breath away even after everything. "You want me to lie to the police?" I asked. "You want me to tell them that I agreed to watch the kids and then negligently abandon them? Do you know what that would do to me? I would be charged with child endangerment. I would lose my clearance. I would lose my job. I would lose everything I have built." Otis gripped my arm tighter, his nails digging in. "Your job? Who cares about your job? Marcus is your brother. He is a man. He has a family. He cannot have a record. You are single. You can bounce back. You owe him this." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at my mother, who was nodding eagerly, her eyes pleading with me to sacrifice myself on the altar of her golden child one last time. "I owe him nothing," I said, pulling my arm free with a violent jerk, "and I certainly do not owe you my future." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the secure doors, leaving them standing in the lobby, impotent and furious. Detective Miller swiped his badge and held the door open for me and David. As we walked down the hallway, the sounds of the station buzzed around me. Phones ringing, radios crackling, the murmur of interrogations. We stopped in front of Observation Room B. Through the one-way glass I saw them. Marcus was sitting at a metal table, still wearing his linen vacation suit, though it was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands were cuffed to the table. He looked small. He looked terrified. But mostly, he looked angry. He was muttering to himself, shaking his head. Becky was in the corner, huddled in a chair, mascara running down her face in black streaks. She wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking at the wall, rocking back and forth. They looked like exactly what they were. 2 people who had spent their lives believing the rules did not apply to them, finally crashing into a wall they could not charm or bully their way through. Detective Miller looked at me. "They are claiming you agreed to take the children verbally. They say you are lying about the text messages to cover your own negligence. They are sticking to that story." I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. "I have the chat logs, detective," I said, unlocking the screen. "I have the timestamps. I have the metadata showing I was in the international terminal when he called. And I have the deed of sale for the house on Maple Street dated 90 days ago. I never agreed. I explicitly refused. And he sent them anyway." The detective nodded, taking the tablet. "That is what I needed to hear. Are you ready to go in?" I straightened my blazer. I thought about the little boy I had been, the girl who was always told to wait, to give, to understand. I thought about Leo, Maya, and Ruby sitting in a stranger's house soaking wet because their father gambled their safety on my compliance. I am ready, I said. David opened the door and I stepped into the interrogation room. Marcus's head snapped up. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with a mix of relief and fury. Kendra, he shouted, straining against the cuffs. Tell them. This is a misunderstanding. Tell them you forgot. I stood at the end of the table looking down at him. I did not sit. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice cool and detached. I hope the flight was smooth. I hear the wine in Napa is to die for, but I suppose you will not be tasting any of it where you are going. Becky stared at the tablet, her mouth agape. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, his head dropping to his chest in defeat. He knew, I said, addressing the detective but looking at Becky. He knew I was not there. He knew it was going to rain. And he explicitly instructed you to leave them on the porch. That is premeditation. That is reckless endangerment. Becky turned slowly to look at her husband. Her face was not sad anymore. It was twisted and fury. You knew, she whispered. You knew she wasn't there. Marcus looked up, his eyes pleading. Babe, she is always lying. I thought she was bluffing. I thought she was just trying to ruin our trip. You idiot, Becky screamed, lunging at him only to be jerked back by the handcuffs chained to the table. You moron. You told me, she confirmed it. You showed me a text message. I faked it, Marcus mumbled. I changed the contact name on my burner phone and texted myself so you would stop worrying. I just wanted us to have a nice weekend. Becky let out a guttural scream of frustration, burying her face in her hands. But then, as the reality of her situation settled in, she lifted her head, and her eyes locked onto me again. The fear was gone, replaced by a sudden sharp malice. The cornered animal was biting back. This is your fault, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You set him up. You knew he would do this. You could have called us back. You could have called the police before we got on the plane. But you waited. You waited until we were in the air. I did not flinch. I warned him, I said. I told him the consequences. You wanted this, Becky spat. You enjoyed this. You are jealous, Kendra. You have always been jealous. You sit in your fancy apartment with your expensive clothes and your lonely life, and you hate us because we have what you can never buy. You have a family. You have love. And you cannot stand it, so you orchestrated this whole thing to break us apart. I stared at her, amazed by the delusion. Jealous? I repeated calmly. You think I am jealous of a marriage where the husband lies to the wife to get her on a plane? You think I am jealous of a mother who dumps her kids in an Uber so she can go wine tasting? Yes, she screamed. You are a bitter, sad woman. And you are punishing my children because you are miserable. That was it. The accusation that I was hurting the children. That was the line. I walked over to the table, leaning down until my face was level with hers. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sour scent of fierce sweat. You want to talk about hurting children? Becky, let us talk about that. I tapped my tablet again, bringing up a new document. It was a spreadsheet, colorful and detailed, created by my firm's forensic accounting software. Detective Miller, I said, not looking away from Becky. Since Mrs. Williams is claiming to be the mother of the year, I think you should see this. This is a financial breakdown of the Williams household for the last 12 months. As a risk analyst, I tend to notice irregularities, especially when my brother asks to borrow money every other week. I slid the tablet toward the detective but made sure Becky could see the screen. Becky, you claim you cannot afford health insurance for the kids? I said, my voice ice cold. You told our parents last month that Leo missed his dental checkup because money was tight. You told me Maya couldn't go to gymnastics because it was too expensive. I pointed to a column of red figures. Yet here we have your credit card statements. $2,100 a month at Serenity Spa in Buckhead. $400 a month at a nail salon. $600 last month alone at a boutique for designer handbags. Becky's face went white. Marcus looked up, his eyes bulging. $2,000, Marcus sputtered. You told me those were Groupons. And Marcus? I continued, ignoring him. You are no better. $3,000 on online sports betting in the last quarter alone. Meanwhile, your children are on the free lunch program at school because you claim poverty. I turned back to the detective. They are not poor, detective. They are negligent. They choose luxury for themselves and poverty for their children. They sent those kids to my house not because they were desperate, but because they did not want to pay for a babysitter. They wanted that money for Napa. The room felt incredibly small. The air was thick with the ugly truth of their lives laid bare. Becky looked like she was going to be sick. The narrative of the struggling young family had been shredded. They were just selfish people who had finally been caught. Detective Miller picked up the tablet, scrolling through the numbers, his expression darkening with every swipe. This goes to character, he muttered. And motive. He looked at the two of them with undisguised disgust. Marcus and Rebecca Williams, you are hereby remanded into custody. Given the flight risk you demonstrated by attempting to leave the state and the financial irregularities shown here, I am recommending no bail until the arraignment hearing on Monday. No bail, Marcus shouted, struggling against his cuffs again. Monday? That is 3 days away. I cannot stay in jail for 3 days. I have things to do. You should have thought of that before you got in the Uber, Detective Miller said, signaling for the uniformed officers outside. Take them to processing. Separate cells. Becky started screaming again, begging, pleading, looking at me with wild eyes. Kendra, help us. Please, take the kids. Just take the kids and we will fix this. Do not let them take my babies. I watched as the officers hauled them to their feet. I watched as they were marched out of the room, Marcus weeping openly now. Becky cursing my name. When the door closed, the silence that rushed back into the room was heavy. Detective Miller looked at me, handing back my tablet. That was brutal, Miss Williams, but necessary. Where are the children? I asked. My voice finally trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. They are being transported to a temporary foster care facility, the detective said gently. Since the parents are in custody, and there is no other approved guardian immediately available, it is procedure. Foster care. The words hit me harder than any of the insults Becky had thrown. Leo, Maya, and Ruby sleeping in a strange place with strangers because their parents were monsters and their aunt had to prove a point. Can I take them? I asked. The detective shook his head. Not tonight. You are a witness in a criminal investigation against their parents. Conflict of interest until the judge clears it. And honestly, Miss Williams, you might want to prepare yourself. Given what you just showed me about their finances and the abandonment charge, this is not going to be a short stay for those kids. I nodded, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. I had won. I had proven I was right. I had exposed them. But as I walked out of the police station into the humid Atlanta night alone, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like the survivor of a car crash standing in the wreckage of my family, knowing that the only way to save myself was to let them burn. As David drove us away from the precinct, the silence in the car was heavy. But for the first time in my life, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like armor. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the Atlanta streetlights blur into streaks of amber and gold. My phone lay face down on my lap, silent. I did not need to look at it to know that my parents were currently blowing up my inbox, probably alternating between begging for money to bail Marcus out and cursing me for being an unnatural daughter. They called me cold. They called me calculating. They asked how I could turn my back on my own flesh and blood. But they never asked what it cost me to become this way. They never asked about the day the warmth finally drained out of me, leaving only the ice they now feared. My mind drifted back 5 years ago to the day I bought the Colonial on Maple Street. It was the proudest moment of my life. I had just been promoted to senior analyst. I had saved every bonus, every tax return, every penny that did not go to rent or student loans. Standing on that porch holding the keys, I felt like I had finally arrived. I had done it alone, without a husband, without a trust fund, and certainly without help from Otis and Viola. I invited them over for a housewarming dinner. I cooked a roast. I bought expensive wine. I wanted them to be proud. I wanted my father to look at the crown molding and say, "Good job, Kendra." I wanted my mother to touch the granite countertops and smile. Instead, Marcus walked in, threw his keys on my entry table and said, "Nice place, sis. A bit big for just one person, isn't it? Maybe I should move into the basement, save you some money on security." He was joking, but he wasn't. My father walked around tapping the walls as if checking for defects. "It is a good investment, Kendra," he said. "But you know property taxes in this zip code are murder. I hope you did not overextend yourself just to show off." My mother simply asked, "Where is the guest room? Your brother might need a place to crash if he and Becky have a fight. You know how she gets." That was the beginning. They did not see 452 Maple Street as my home. They saw it as the Williams family annex, a communal asset that I paid for, but they controlled. For 4.5 years, I tolerated it. I tolerated Marcus dropping by unannounced to raid my fridge because Becky forgot to go grocery shopping. I tolerated my parents hosting their church committee meetings in my living room because your house is so much more presentable than ours, Kendra. I tolerated the way they treated my sanctuary like a public park. I was the black sheep, not because I was bad, but because I was useful. I was the sheep they shared whenever they needed wool and then left out in the cold. Marcus was the golden child. He could do no wrong. His failures were just bad luck. My successes were just luck. But the breaking point, the moment I decided to burn the bridge while I was still standing on it, happened 6 months ago. The Super Bowl incident. I had been sent to Chicago for a risk assessment conference. It was a huge opportunity networking with international partners. I had told my parents explicitly, I will be gone for 4 days. The alarm is set. Do not go over there. I came home a day early. The conference had ended at noon, and I caught an earlier flight wanting nothing more than to take a hot bath and sleep in my own bed. When my Uber pulled up to the house, there were 4 cars in the driveway. I did not recognize any of them. The front door was unlocked. I walked into my foyer and the smell hit me first. Stale beer, marijuana smoke, the heavy cloying scent of cheap cologne. My living room, which I kept pristine, was a disaster zone. There were red plastic cups everywhere. Pizza boxes were stacked on my coffee table, grease soaking into the wood. And there in the center of the room was Marcus. He was sitting on my custom Italian cream leather sofa, holding a beer, laughing with 3 men I had never seen before. They were watching a rerun of the game on my television, with the volume turned up to the max. Marcus looked up when I walked in. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed. Kendra, he said, you are back early. You ruined the vibe. I looked at the sofa. There was a dark purple stain spreading across the cream leather cushion. A wine stain. It was massive. It looked like a gunshot wound. That sofa cost $8,000. I had saved for 6 months to buy it. It was the first piece of furniture I bought just because I loved it, not because it was practical. Get out, I whispered. Relax, Marcus said, standing up. It is just a little spill. Becky has some club soda, she can get it out. These are my boys from the gym. We were just unwinding. Get out, I screamed. I had never screamed at him before. Not like that. His friends scrambled, grabbing their jackets and hustling out the door, mumbling apologies. Marcus stood his ground, his jaw tight. You are embarrassing me, he hissed. You broke into my house, I said, shaking with rage. How did you even get in? Dad gave me the key, he said casually. I told him I needed a place to host the guys since Becky was cleaning the townhouse. He said it was fine. He said you wouldn't mind because you are family. I kicked him out. I physically shoved him out the door and locked it behind him. Then I called my parents. I expected an apology. I expected outrage. I was naive. Oh, Kendra, stop crying, my mother. Viola said when I told her about the sofa. It is just furniture. Things can be replaced. People cannot. He broke into my home, I said. He violated my privacy. He is your brother. My father. Otis chimed in on the speakerphone. He is a man, Kendra. Men need a place to socialize. He cannot bring his friends to that cramped townhouse with the kids screaming. He needed a space to network. You should be happy you could provide that for him. You have so much, and he has so little. Why are you so calculating? Why do you count every penny when it comes to your brother? Calculating. The word hung in the air. I looked at the ruined sofa. I looked at the grease stains on the table. I looked at the life I had built, the sanctuary I had created, and I realized it would never be safe. As long as they knew where I lived, as long as they had a key, as long as they felt entitled to my existence, I would never be safe. You are right, I said to my parents. My voice suddenly calmed. I have been too calculating. I need to let it go. They thought I meant I was forgiving him. They thought I was going back to my role as the doormat. Good, Viola said. We knew you would see reason. We will tell Marcus you calm down. I hung up the phone. I did not clean the living room. I called a cleaning crew to do it the next morning. Then I called a real estate agent. I want to sell, I told her. Cash offers only, quick closing, and I want it done quietly. The market was hot. The house sold in 3 days to a developer who paid $50,000 over asking. While the paperwork was going through, I started looking for my new home. But this time, I did not look for a house with a porch and a guest room. I looked for a fortress. I found the penthouse in Midtown. It was on the 25th floor. It had a doorman who looked like a linebacker. It had elevators that required a key card. It had no guest parking. But I did not buy it, in my name. I was a risk analyst. I knew how to hide assets. I formed a limited liability company. I named it Cerberus Holdings LLC, after the 3-headed dog that guarded the gates of the underworld. When I signed the deed, I signed it as the manager of the LLC. My name, Kendra Williams, appeared nowhere on the public tax records. If anyone searched for me, they would find a P.O. box at a UPS store in a strip mall. I moved out on a Tuesday while my parents were at their weekly bridge game. And Marcus was at a job interview. He probably tanked on purpose. I hired high-end movers who packed everything in 4 hours. I left the house on Maple Street empty and clean. I left the keys on the counter for the new owner, Colonel Johnson. I had met him once during the final walkthrough. I value privacy, he had told me, looking around the neighborhood with suspicious eyes. I do not like solicitors, and I do not like surprises. Neither do I. Colonel the First had replied. Neither do I. I did not tell my family I moved. I simply stopped inviting them over. When they asked to come by, I told them I was busy with work, or the house was being fumigated, or I was traveling. I met them at restaurants. I went to their house. I kept the illusion alive because I knew I needed to buy time. I needed them to believe the safety net was still there right up until the moment they tried to jump. I sat in David's car, blinking back the memory. The anger I felt now was not the hot explosive rage of the Super Bowl. It was cold. It was hard. It was a diamond formed under the pressure of 34 years of neglect. Marcus had not just dropped his kids off at a house. He had dropped them off at the scene of his previous crime. He assumed the door would open because it always had. He assumed I would be there to clean up the mess because I always did. But the Kendra who cleaned up wine stains was gone. The Kendra who sat in this car was the manager of Cerberus Holdings, and she was done negotiating with terrorists. David turned onto the highway, heading toward the juvenile court detention center, where the emergency hearing would be held the next morning. You okay? He asked, glancing at me. I am fine, I said. I was just thinking about my old sofa. The Italian leather one? Yes, I said. It was beautiful, but it taught me an expensive lesson. What is that? That you cannot get wine out of leather, I said, staring at the city lights. Sometimes you just have to throw the whole thing out and buy something new. Something stain-resistant. Marcus was the stain. And tomorrow morning in front of a judge, I was going to scrub him out of my life for good. I checked into the Four Seasons in Midtown Atlanta under my corporate account, hoping that the high walls and higher price tag would buy me a few hours of silence. I should have known better. My parents, Otis and Viola Williams, did not understand the concept of boundaries. They viewed a locked door, not as a barrier, but as a personal challenge. It was 9:00 p.m. I was sitting in the armchair by the window looking out at the city lights, trying to force myself to eat a club sandwich I had ordered from room service. My stomach was in knots. The image of Marcus in handcuffs and Becky screaming was burned into my retinas. But what haunted me more was the look of my father's face in the police station lobby. The way he had moved to strike me. The way he had looked at me not as his daughter, but as an enemy combatant. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. It was not the rhythmic professional knock of housekeeping. It was a frantic, heavy pounding. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Otis and Viola. Of course, I debated not opening it. I could call security. I could have them escorted off the premises. But I knew that would only delay the inevitable. They would scream in the hallway. They would cause a scene. And frankly, I needed to hear what they had to say. I needed to know exactly how far they were willing to go. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the voice memo app. I hit record and slid it into the deep pocket of my silk robe. Then I opened the door. They did not storm in this time. The rage that had fueled them at the precinct had burned out, leaving behind a desperate, pathetic exhaustion. My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her church hat was gone, and her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was loose and frazzled. My father looked old. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes bloodshot. They carried with them the smell of rain and desperation. May we come in? Kendra Otis asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside. They walked into the suite and stood in the middle of the room, looking out of place among the modern art and velvet furniture. Viola was holding a Tupperware container. I brought you some peach cobbler, she said, holding it out with trembling hands. I know you did not eat dinner. You never eat when you are stressed. It was a peace offering, a weaponized dessert. It was the same move she used after she forgot to pick me up from school, or after she let Marcus blow out my birthday candles. Food meant love, even when the actions showed indifference. Put it on the table, I said. She set it down next to my untouched sandwich. We need to talk, Kendra Otis said, sinking onto the sofa without waiting for an invitation. We need to find a way to fix this mess. There is no fixing this, I said, remaining standing. I wanted the height advantage. Marcus and Becky are in jail. The children are in state custody. The hearing is tomorrow morning. The only thing left to do is let the legal system work. The legal system will destroy him. Viola whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You know what happens to black men in the system, Kendra? If he gets a felony record, his life is over. He will never get a good job. He will never be able to vote. He will lose everything. He should have thought about that before he abandoned his children. I said, my voice steady. He did this, Mother. Not me. Not the police. Him. We know, Otis said, quickly holding up a hand to stop Viola from arguing. We know he made a mistake, a terrible stupid mistake. He is impulsive. He always has been. But he does not deserve to have his life ruined over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Is that what we are calling it now? Yes, Otis said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Because that is what it can be. If you help us, I crossed my arms. How exactly am I supposed to help him, Dad? I gave the police the evidence. The truth is out. Evidence can be interpreted. Otis said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Text messages can be misread. Timestamps can be confusing. Look, I spoke to a lawyer friend of mine, a criminal defense attorney. He said there is a way out of this, a way that brings the kids home and keeps Marcus out of prison. I waited, letting the silence stretch, knowing he was about to dig his own grave. You just have to change your statement, Otis said. I stared at him. Change my statement. Yes, you go to the prosecutor tomorrow morning before the hearing. You tell them that you made a mistake. You tell them that you and Marcus did speak on the phone and you did agree to watch the kids, but in the rush of your business trip, you simply forgot. You got the dates mixed up. You thought they were coming next weekend. I felt a cold numbness spread through my limbs. You want me to lie? I said. It is not a lie. It is a reinterpretation, Otis insisted. You tell them it was a family miscommunication. You say you feel terrible about it. If you say that the intent to abandon goes away, the felony charge gets dropped. It becomes a misdemeanor negligence case. Marcus pays a fine, maybe does some community service, and it goes away. The kids come back to us because it was just an accident. No harm, no foul. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who had sat at the head of the table every Sunday and led us in grace. And I saw a stranger. Hey! I walked over to the window, looking down at the street, 20 floors below. Let me understand this clearly, Dad, I said, keeping my back to them. You want me to walk into a district attorney's office and confess to child neglect? You want me to go on public record stating that I agreed to take responsibility for 3 children and then flew to another continent, leaving them to fend for themselves in a thunderstorm? Yes, Otis said. Just to save your brother. Just this once. I turned around. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? I asked, my voice rising. I work in high finance, Dad. I am a risk analyst. My entire career relies on my integrity, my reliability, and my background check. If I have a charge of child neglect on my record, even a misdemeanor, I will be fired. I will lose my security clearance. I will be blacklisted from every major firm in the country. I will lose my license. I took a step toward them. You are asking me to burn my career to the ground. You are asking me to destroy 15 years of hard work. You are asking me to become unhireable, just so Marcus does not have to face the consequences of his own actions. Otis looked down at his hands. You are exaggerating, Kendra. It is a family matter. Your job does not have to know. My job monitors arrest records, I snapped. They will know before I even leave the courthouse. There was a long silence. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. Then Viola spoke. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked up at me and her expression was not one of pleading anymore. It was one of cold judgment. So, what she said. I blinked. Excuse me. So what if you lose your job? Viola said, her voice steady and sharp. It is just a job, Kendra. You are a smart girl. You can find something else. You can work in administration. You can work in retail. You have plenty of money saved up. You will survive. I felt like I had been slapped. Just a job. My career was my life. It was the one thing I had built that they could not touch. But Marcus, she continued, standing up now, her voice gaining strength. Marcus is a man. He is the head of his household. He has a wife. He has children who look up to him. He carries the Williams name. If he goes to prison, that stain never washes off. He will be broken. She took a step toward me, her eyes blazing with a twisted maternal ferocity. Your career. What is a career to a woman, Kendra? You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You come home to an empty apartment every night. Your job is all you have because you are too selfish to build a real life. But Marcus has a legacy. He is the pillar of this family. He cannot have a record. We cannot let the world see him like that. The words hung in the air, ugly and naked. There it was. The truth I had suspected my entire life, but never wanted to hear. In their eyes, I was disposable. My achievements? My millions? My penthouse? None of it mattered because I was just a woman without a husband. I was a spare part. My purpose was to be harvested to keep the golden boy alive. Marcus was the pillar. The unemployed gambler who lived off his wife and parents was the pillar. And I, the one who paid the bills. The one who bailed them out. The one who actually succeeded. I was nothing more than collateral damage. I looked at Viola. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. And I felt the last tether of attachment snap. It was a physical sensation. A sharp pain in my chest, followed by a profound hollowness. I looked at Otis, waiting for him to defend me. Waiting for him to tell her she was wrong. But he just looked at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. He agreed with her. He was willing to sacrifice his daughter to save his son. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone, ensuring it was still recording. You really believe that, don't you? I asked softly. You believe that my life is worth less than his because I am a woman? Viola did not back down. I believe that family sacrifices for each other. And right now, you are the one who can afford to lose something. Marcus cannot. It is your duty, Kendra. If you have any love for us at all, you will do this. I nodded slowly. Duty. Love. They used these words like knives carving pieces off me until there was nothing left. Okay, I said. Otis's head snapped up. Hope flooded his face. You will do it. You will take the blame. I walked to the door and opened it wide. I will be at the courthouse tomorrow morning, I said. Viola let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Kendra. I knew you had a heart. I knew you would not let us down. She rushed over and tried to hug me. I stiffened, not returning the embrace. She smelled like peaches and betrayal. We will meet you there, Otis said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, looking 10 years younger than he had when he walked in. We will tell the lawyer to draw up the new statement. You are doing the right thing, honey. You are saving this family. They walked out into the hallway, buoyed by their victory. They thought they had won. They thought they had bullied me into submission one last time. I watched them get into the elevator. As the doors closed, my mother waved at me, a smile on her face that made my stomach turn. I closed the door to my suite and locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let out a long, shuddering breath. I pulled the phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. I pressed play. Your career. What is a career to a woman, Kendra? Marcus is the pillar. It is your duty. The audio was crisp. Every word, every pause, every ounce of their disdain was captured forever. I walked back to the window. Atlanta was glowing below me, a city of steel and glass and ambition. I was not going to the prosecutor to confess. I was going to the prosecutor to hand them this recording. This was not just evidence of their character. This was evidence of witness tampering. This was evidence of conspiracy to commit perjury. This was evidence of obstruction of justice. They wanted me to save the family. I was going to save the family, all right? I was going to save the children from the people who raised them. I picked up the peach cobbler Viola had left on the table. I walked to the trash can and dropped it in. It landed with a heavy, wet thud. I went to the bathroom and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like a doormat. I looked like a risk analyst who had just identified a catastrophic threat and determined the only way to neutralize it was a total liquidation. I picked up my phone and dialed David. He answered on the second ring. Kendra. It is late. Is everything okay? I am fine, David. I said, my voice calm and cold, but I have something for you. My parents just left. Did they threaten you? Better, I said. They tried to suborn perjury, and I have it all on tape. David let out a low whistle. That changes everything. Yes, it does, I said. I want you to prepare a motion for the hearing tomorrow. I am not just a witness anymore, David. I am petitioning for emergency custody of the children, and I want an order of protection against my parents. There was a pause on the line. Are you sure, Kendra? Once you do this, there is no going back. They will never forgive you. I looked at the empty room at the trash can holding the cobbler. They never loved me, David. They only loved what I could do for them. I am done being their utility. Tomorrow, I become their judge. I hung up the phone. I turned off the lights, and for the first time in days, I slept. I slept the sleep of the just knowing that when the sun rose, I would burn their world to the ground. The Fulton County Family Court building smelled of floor-wax stale coffee and the distinct metallic tang of desperation. It was a place where the facade of happy families was stripped away, leaving only the ugly raw nerves of dysfunction exposed for a judge to adjudicate. I sat in the second row of the gallery, my hands folded neatly in my lap, wearing a charcoal power suit that cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. Next to me, David tapped his pen against his legal pad, a rhythmic sound that matched the ticking of the clock on the wall. At the defendant's table, Marcus and Becky sat slumped in their chairs. They were not wearing their vacation clothes anymore. They were wearing standard-issue county orange jumpsuits. The transformation was jarring. Without his linen suit and his arrogance, Marcus looked small, deflated like a balloon that had lost its air. Becky's hair, usually blow-dried to perfection, was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the dark circles of a woman who had spent the last 3 nights in a holding cell, listening to the sounds of real criminals. They refused to look at me. They stared straight ahead at the seal of the state of Georgia hanging above the judge's bench, terrified and angry. Judge Beverly Thorne swept into the room. She was a formidable woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie a parent could possibly tell. She did not bang her gavel. She simply sat down, opened the file in front of her, and the room fell into a terrified silence. In the matter of the state versus Marcus and Rebecca Williams, regarding the custody of minors Leo Maya and Ruby Williams, she said, her voice dry as parchment. We are here to determine temporary guardianship pending the outcome of the criminal charges against the parents. The attorney for Child Protective Services, a young woman who looked overworked and underpaid, stood up. Your Honor, the state requests that the children remain in foster care. The parents have demonstrated a profound lack of judgment, amounting to criminal negligence. Furthermore, our investigation into the family's background has revealed a pattern of instability that makes them unfit guardians at this time. Marcus shifted in his seat, his chains rattling. His public defender put a hand on his arm to silence him. Judge Thorne looked over her glasses. Elaborate on the instability. The CPS attorney nodded and picked up a document. It was the financial dossier I had provided to the police. Seeing it there in the hands of the state felt like watching a bomb I had built finally being detonated. Your Honor, Mr. Williams has been unemployed for 26 months, she began. Despite this, the family maintains a lifestyle that burns through approximately $12,000 a month. This lifestyle is funded entirely by credit card debt, predatory loans, and cash infusions from the paternal grandparents. She flipped a page. Mrs. Williams claims to be a stay-at-home mother, yet records show she spends an average of 30 hours a week outside the home at various beauty and wellness appointments, while the children are largely unsupervised or left with neighbors. The children are not enrolled in any extracurricular activities due to alleged lack of funds, yet Mrs. Williams spent $4,000 on a handbag last month. The children are behind on vaccinations and dental care. Leo needs a root canal that has been put off for 6 months, while Mr. Williams purchased a season pass to a luxury golf range. The air in the courtroom grew thin. I watched Becky's shoulders shake. She was crying again, but I felt nothing. This was just data. This was the math of their selfishness, finally being balanced. The CPS attorney looked directly at Marcus. Essentially, Your Honor, these children are accessories to their parents' lifestyle. They are fed and clothed minimally, while the parents live like royalty on borrowed dimes. The abandonment incident this weekend was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable result of 2 people who view their children as inconveniences. That was the spark. Marcus slammed his hands on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He stood up, dragging his chair with him. His face twisted in a snarl of wounded pride. That is a lie, he shouted. I am a good father. I love my kids. Sit down, Mr. Williams. Judge Thorne barked. No, I will not sit down. Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. You are listening to her. He pointed a shaking finger at me without turning around. You are listening to my vindictive sister. She gave you those numbers. She cooked the books. She is trying to steal my kids because she is jealous. I am their father. I have rights. You cannot take my children away because of one mistake. I am the man of the house. The bailiff took a step forward, his hand resting on his taser. Judge Thorne did not flinch. She looked at Marcus with the kind of cold disdain usually reserved for insects. Mr. Williams, you are currently facing 3 felony counts of child abandonment, she said, her voice deadly calm. You were arrested at an airport 3,000 miles away from your children while a storm raged. You do not have rights right now. You have a very thin thread of liberty that I am about to snap. She banged her gavel once, a sharp final sound. The court finds that Marcus and Rebecca Williams are currently unfit to care for these minors. Temporary custody is granted to the state. The parents are remanded to county jail without bail pending their arraignment on Tuesday, given the flight risk established by their previous actions. Becky let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. Marcus slumped back into his chair, defeated, his head in his hands. It was done. They had lost. But the play was not over. The second act was just beginning. From the front row of the gallery, my parents Otis and Viola stood up. They were dressed in their Sunday best. My father in a 3-piece navy suit, my mother in a cream-colored dress with a matching hat. They looked like the pillars of the community they pretended to be. They looked respectable. They looked safe. Your Honor. Otis said, his deep baritone voice filling the room. He projected the aura of a patriarch stepping in to clean up a mess. Judge Thorne looked at them. And who are you? I am Otis Williams. This is my wife, Viola. We are the paternal grandparents. The judge's expression softened slightly. Courts always preferred family placement. It was less trauma for the kids, less cost for the state. Mr. Williams, the judge said. You understand the gravity of this situation. We do, Your Honor, Otis said, stepping into the aisle. We are devastated by our son's lapse in judgment. We do not excuse it. But these are our grandchildren. We have been part of their lives since they were born. We cannot let them go into the system with strangers. We are requesting emergency kinship guardianship. The CPS attorney looked through her files. We have not had time to vet the grandparents, Your Honor. However, they do have a clean record, no criminal history. Otis nodded his chest, puffing out slightly. We are upstanding citizens, Your Honor. I am a retired deacon. My wife is a retired educator. We have the means and the time to care for the children. We want to take them home today. We want to provide the stability they have been lacking. Judge Thorne looked thoughtful. She tapped her pen against her lip. Where do you reside, Mr. Williams? We live at 452 Maple Street, Otis said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the back of the room where I sat. It is a large colonial home in the historic district. 4 bedrooms, large fenced yard. It is the family home, Your Honor. The children know it well. They have their own rooms there. It is a safe environment, a place of love and tradition. He turned his head slightly, casting a glare in my direction. It was a look of triumph. He was playing the hero. He was saving the day. He was proving that despite my betrayal, the Williams family, the real Williams family, was strong. We own the home outright. Otis continued, lying with the ease of a man who had believed his own fiction for years. It is an asset valued at nearly $800,000. We have the financial stability to provide for all 3 children immediately. We can take them right now. Beside him, Viola dabbed at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. We just want our babies home, she whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. We just want to heal this family. The courtroom seemed to sway with the emotional weight of their performance. It was perfect. The grieving grandparents stepping in to save the innocent children from the wreckage caused by their foolish son and their cold-hearted daughter. Judge Thorne nodded slowly. She looked impressed. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, the court appreciates your willingness to step forward, she said. In cases like this, kinship placement is always our preference. If you have a stable home, adequate space, and the financial means to support 3 children, I see no reason to keep them in foster care for another night. Otis smiled. It was a benevolent smile. Thank you, Your Honor. You will not regret this. The judge picked up her pen, ready to sign the order that would hand Leo, Maya, and Ruby over to the very people who had created the monster that was Marcus. The people who had enabled his behavior, who had funded his negligence, who had tried to force me to commit perjury just 12 hours ago. Wait, Your Honor, David said, standing up. The judge paused, pen hovering over the paper. She looked at David, annoyed. Who are you, counselor? I am David Sterling, representing Kendra Williams, the aunt of the children, and a witness in this case. Otis rolled his eyes. Your Honor. My daughter is... She has personal issues. She is trying to obstruct this process out of spite. Judge Thorne looked at me. I sat stone still, my face a mask of calm. Ms. Williams? The judge asked. Do you have an objection to the grandparents taking custody? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. I looked at Otis and Viola, who were staring at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. They knew I had the recording. But they thought I wouldn't use it here. They thought I wouldn't dare humiliate them in public. They were wrong. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and steady. I do not object to the grandparents because of spite. I object because their petition is based on perjury. Perjury. Otis sputtered, his face turning purple. How dare you, Mr. Williams, claim to own the residence at 452 Maple Street? I continued, ignoring him. He claimed it is a stable home. He claimed to have financial stability. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a leather binder. The truth, Your Honor, is that Otis and Viola Williams do not own that house. They have not owned it for 2 years. It was foreclosed on due to unpaid taxes and a second mortgage they took out to pay for Marcus's gambling debts. The room went silent. Otis looked like he had been punched in the gut. Viola grabbed his arm for support. The house was sold at auction, I said. And it was purchased by a private company to prevent my parents from being evicted. They are currently tenants. They pay 0 rent. They have no lease. and their tenure is entirely at the mercy of the landlord. And who is the landlord? Judge Thorne asked, her eyes narrowing. I opened the binder and pulled out the deed. I held it up. The landlord is Bluebird LLC, Your Honor, and I am the sole proprietor of Bluebird LLC. I looked at my parents. I owned the house, Your Honor. I paid their debts. I paid their taxes. I put a roof over their heads when they were bankrupt. And I did it anonymously so they could keep their dignity. I took a step closer to the railing. But last night, these two people came to my hotel room and tried to coerce me into lying to the police to save their son. They told me my career didn't matter. They told me to commit a felony. And when I refused, they threatened me. I turned back to the judge. So no, Your Honor. They do not have a stable home. Because as of this moment, I am terminating their tenancy. They are being evicted. They have nowhere to take those children because by tonight, they will have nowhere to go themselves. Otis looked at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The arrogance was gone. The triumph was gone. There was only the terrifying realization that the safety net he had been jumping on for years had just vanished. Judge Thorne looked from me to Otis, then back to me. She slowly set her pen down. Is this true, Mr. Williams? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. Do you live in a home owned by your daughter? Otis couldn't speak. He just nodded, a jerky, spasmodic motion. The judge leaned back in her chair. Then, your petition is denied, she said. She looked at the bailiff. Remove the defendants, and Mr. Sterling, please approach the bench with your client. We have a lot to discuss. I looked at my parents one last time, and then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of the wolf who had finally blown the house down. I sat in the witness chair, the wood hard against my back, my hands resting calmly on the railing. The courtroom air was stagnant, recycled and heavy with the scent of old paper and anxiety. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire theater of my life. To my left, Judge Thorne waited, her pen hovering over the order that would hand 3 innocent children to the architects of my brother's destruction. To my right, my parents Otis and Viola sat shoulder to shoulder, radiating a fragile, desperate dignity. They looked at me. Their eyes were wide, silently screaming a mixture of commands and pleas. Be a good daughter. Be silent. Do not ruin this. My father's earlier confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He knew I had the recording from the hotel room. He knew I could prove witness tampering. But he was gambling that I would not use it. He was betting on the one thing he had relied on for 34 years, my desire to be loved by them. He thought that deep down, I was still the little girl waiting for a pat on the head. He was wrong. That little girl died the day she realized her college fund had been liquidated to pay for Marcus's basketball camp. The woman sitting in the witness chair was not looking for love. She was looking for a return on investment, and today she was cashing out. David stood at the podium. He adjusted his cufflinks, a shark smelling blood in the water. Miss Williams, he began, his voice projecting to the back of the room. You heard your father's testimony regarding his fitness to serve as a guardian. He stated under oath that he owns the property at 452 Maple Street outright. He stated that he has the financial stability to provide for 3 children. Do you have any evidence that contradicts this statement? I leaned into the microphone. It made a small feedback whine before I spoke. Yes, I do. Otis flinched. Viola grabbed his hand, her knuckles white. Please elaborate, David said, stepping back to give me the floor. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I do not oppose my parents because I doubt their love for their grandchildren. I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I believe they love Leo, Maya, and Ruby in their own way. But love does not pay for dental work. Gambling addiction? Judge Thorne asked, her eyebrows shooting up. Mr. Williams stated he is a retired deacon with a pension. Mr. Williams is a retired deacon, I acknowledged, but he is also a man who has systematically drained his entire net worth to cover the debts of his son Marcus. I opened the leather binder I had brought to the stand. The sound of the 3 metal rings snapping open echoed in the silent courtroom like a pistol cocking. 3 years ago, Marcus accumulated $50,000 in sports betting debt with an illegal bookmaker, I said, pulling out a stack of bank statements. He was threatened. To save him, my father took out a second mortgage on the family home. He drained his 401k. He liquidated his life insurance policy. I held up the documents. The red ink on the pages was visible even from the bench. They paid the debt, I continued. But they could not pay the mortgage. The house fell into foreclosure 2 years ago. The bank seized it. They were 2 weeks away from being evicted by the sheriff. They were packing boxes. They were going to move into a motel. Otis let out a strangled sound, a gasp that sounded like a dying engine. He tried to stand up but his legs wouldn't support him. He slumped back down, his face turning the color of ash. This is irrelevant. He croaked, his voice shaking. That is private family business. We still live there. We have a home. Sit down, Mr. Williams. Judge Thorne barked, her gavel hitting the wood with a crack. Ms. Williams, continue. If the house was foreclosed on, why are they still residing there? Because of Bluebird LLC, I pulled out the next document. It was a deed of sale stamped with the official seal of Fulton County. When the house went to auction, I said I knew my parents would not survive the humiliation of being homeless. Their reputation in the community is the only currency they have left. They could not bear the shame. So, I intervened. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me. Her mouth opened. Her eyes filled with a dawning horror. She was starting to put the pieces together. I formed a holding company called Bluebird LLC, I explained. I used my corporate bonus and my savings. I bought the house at auction for $300,000 cash. I paid off the tax liens. I paid off the outstanding utility bills. And I allowed the previous owners to remain in the residence as tenants. Tenants, Judge Thorne repeated. Tenants at will, Your Honor. They pay zero rent. They pay zero property taxes. They pay zero maintenance. The only condition was that they never asked who the owner was. The management company told them it was an anonymous investor who wanted to hold the property for future development. I paused, letting the information sink in. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the ragged breathing of my father. They believed it because they wanted to believe it, I said. They believed they were lucky. They believed God had provided a miracle. But it wasn't a miracle. It was me. I stood up and walked to the edge of the witness box, holding the deed up for the court to see. I am Bluebird LLC, Your Honor. I am the sole proprietor. I am the investor. I am the landlord. The reaction was visceral. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The court reporter stopped typing for a split second, her jaw dropping. The CPS attorney looked from me to my parents, her eyes wide. But it was my parents' reaction that I savored. Otis looked like he had been shot. He stared at me with a look of absolute betrayal, as if my saving them from homelessness was the crime and not his lies. He realized in that moment that the daughter he had dismissed, the daughter he had called selfish, the daughter he had tried to sacrifice to save his son, had been the only thing standing between him and the street for 2 years. Viola let out a wail. It was a high, thin sound of pure despair. She covered her face with her hands rocking back and forth. No, she moaned. No, no, no. She knew what this meant. She knew the power dynamic had just shifted so violently that the earth beneath her feet had cracked open. Judge Thorne leaned forward, her face stern. Ms. Williams, are you stating for the record that you own the residence at 452 Maple Street? Yes, Your Honor, I said. And I have the tax receipts to prove it. And these tenants, your parents, are they aware of this arrangement? They are now, I said. Then Mr. Williams lied under oath. The judge said, her voice turning to ice. He claimed to own the home. He claimed to have financial stability. He has neither, I said. He lives on Social Security checks that barely cover their food because Marcus steals half of it every month. If you give them these children, Your Honor, you are sending them to a home that is not theirs, funded by a woman. They have disowned emotionally and overseen by a man who cannot say no to his son. I walked back to the defense table and picked up one last piece of paper. It was a single sheet, crisp and white. And there is one more thing, Your Honor. I turned to face my parents. I looked at the hat my mother wore to church to pray for a son who gambled away her security. I looked at the suit my father wore to lie to a judge. Last night, these two people came to my hotel room. I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence. They tried to coerce me into committing perjury to save Marcus from prison. They told me my career didn't matter. They told me I was disposable. They threatened me. I handed the paper to the bailiff to give to the judge. This is a notice to quit, Your Honor. It is an eviction notice. Viola screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound. You can't do this to us. We are your parents. I ignored her. I looked only at the judge. Per the terms of the tenancy agreement, any harassment or illegal activity by the tenant voids the lease immediately. Witness tampering is illegal. Harassment is illegal. I took a deep breath. I am evicting them, Your Honor. As of today, they are homeless. They have no address. They have no assets. And therefore they cannot take custody of these children. Chaos erupted. Otis stood up, knocking his chair over. You ungrateful witch, he shouted, lunging toward the railing. After everything we did for you, I fed you. I clothed you. You owe me. That house is mine. I built this family. Bailiff Judge Thorne shouted, banging her gavel furiously. Order! Order! In this court? 2 deputies rushed forward, grabbing Otis by the arms as he tried to climb over the partition. He was foaming at the mouth, screaming obscenities that no deacon should ever know, let alone shout in a court of law. You stole it! He roared as they dragged him back. You stole my dignity. You gave it away, Dad. I shouted back, my voice finally breaking the calm facade. You gave it away when you chose a criminal over your own integrity. You gave it away when you asked me to lie. I didn't steal anything. I bought the wreckage you left behind. Viola collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. My babies, she wailed. My grandbabies. Where will they go? Judge Thorne stood up, her black robes billowing like the wings of an avenging angel. Remove Mr. Williams from this courtroom, immediately, she ordered. And Mrs. Williams, if you do not compose yourself, you will join him in a holding cell. The deputies hauled Otis out the double doors, his shouts fading into the hallway. Viola was helped into her chair by a sympathetic but firm female deputy. She sat there weeping, broken, a queen, whose kingdom had been revealed to be made of cardboard. I stood there alone in the center of the storm I had summoned. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. Judge Thorne looked at me. There was a new respect in her eyes, mixed with a profound sadness. Mrs. Williams, she said quietly. The court acknowledges your ownership of the property, and the court acknowledges the perjury committed by the petitioner. She looked at the empty chair where Otis had been. Petition for kinship guardianship is denied with prejudice. The grandparents are deemed unfit due to lack of stable housing, financial insolvency, and attempted fraud upon the court. She looked at the CPS attorney. The children will remain in the custody of the state until a suitable placement can be found. I nodded. It was done. I had saved the children from the cycle of dysfunction. I had stopped Marcus. I had stopped my parents. But as I looked at my mother, a small broken figure in a big empty room, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the crushing weight of the truth I had just spoken. I was Bluebird. I was the safety net, and I had just cut the ropes. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind my father, cutting off his screams and leaving a ringing silence in their wake. The courtroom felt like a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out, leaving only the raw, exposed nerves of a family finally dissected. My mother Viola sat slumped in her chair at the defense table. She was no longer the matriarch who commanded Sunday dinners. She was a small, trembling woman in a cream-colored dress that suddenly looked like a costume from a play that had been canceled. I stood at the witness stand, my hand resting on the leather binder. I was not done. I had taken their pride. Now I had to take their shelter, Your Honor, I said, my voice slicing through the quiet. The issue of ownership is established, but the issue of stability goes deeper than just a deed. It goes to the contract that governs their residence. Judge Thorne adjusted her glasses, looking from the closed doors back to me. Her face was stern, but I saw a flicker of curiosity. She knew I was a risk analyst. She knew I did not leave loose ends. Proceed, Miss Williams, she said. I opened the binder to the final tab. I pulled out a document stapled on blue legal paper. It was thick, dense with legal jargon and signed in blue ink on the last page. 2 years ago, when Bluebird LLC purchased the property at foreclosure, I presented the tenants Otis and Viola Williams with a standard residential lease agreement, I explained. At the time, they believed it was paperwork from the bank allowing them to stay in the home as part of a restructuring deal. They did not read it. They never read the fine print. They assumed because they had been rescued that the rules did not apply to them. They signed it immediately. I looked at my mother. She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. She remembered signing. I could see it in her face. She remembered the relief of that day, thinking she had gotten away with it. I turned to page 14 of the document, Clause 12. I read aloud, my voice echoing in the chamber. Tenant conduct and termination. The tenant agrees to conduct themselves in a lawful and respectful manner. Any act of harassment, intimidation, threat of violence or coercion directed at the landlord or the landlord's agents shall constitute a material breach of this lease. In the event of such a breach, the landlord reserves the right to terminate the tenancy immediately without notice, and seek immediate possession of the property. I looked up from the paper. It is a standard clause, Your Honor, usually inserted to protect landlords from violent tenants. But in this case, it was inserted to protect me from my own parents. Viola made a small sound, a whimper that died in her throat. Ms. Williams, the judge said, are you alleging that such a breach has occurred? I am not just alleging it, Your Honor, I said. I am proving it. I reached for my tablet again. I swiped to the audio file I had recorded in the hotel room. The file named the ultimatum. Last night, at approximately 9:30 p.m., the tenants came to my hotel room, I said. They did not know I was the landlord, but they knew I was the key to keeping their son out of prison. They came to coerce a witness. They came to threaten me. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the courtroom's acoustic design. You want me to lie to the police? My voice tinny but distinct. It is not a lie, it is a reinterpretation. My father's voice arrogant and dismissive. You tell them it was a family miscommunication. Marcus pays a fine. And it goes away. The courtroom listened frozen. The CPS attorney looked down at her desk, shaking her head. The bailiff shifted his stance, his hand tightening on his belt. Then came my mother's voice. The voice that had sung me lullabies. The voice that had told me I was difficult. So what if you lose your job, Kendra? It is just a job. Your career is all you have because you are too selfish to build a real life. But Marcus has a legacy. It is your duty. I let the recording play to the end. I let the silence that followed stretch until it was painful. I looked at Viola. She was staring at the tablet, her hand covering her mouth, as if she could stuff the words back in. She realized now that her cruelty was not just a private weapon. It was a public record. I stopped the playback. This recording, Your Honor, is evidence of witness tampering, I said. It is evidence of coercion. They threatened my livelihood. They belittled my existence. They tried to force me to commit a felony to cover up their son's crime. I picked up the lease agreement. This constitutes a material breach of Clause 12. They have harassed the landlord. They have threatened the landlord. They have attempted to harm the landlord. I walked to the edge of the witness box. I looked directly at my mother. I wanted her to see me, not the ATM, not the scapegoat. The landlord. Therefore, I said, my voice hard as diamonds as the sole proprietor of Bluebird LLC. I am exercising my right to terminate the lease immediately. I turned to the judge. I am evicting them, Your Honor. As of this moment, Otis and Viola Williams are trespassers. They have no legal right to reside at 452 Maple Street. They have no lease. They have no equity. And they have 24 hours to vacate the premises before I have the locks changed. Viola gasped. Kendra, no. You cannot. It is our home. It was never your home. Mother, I snapped, losing my composure for a fraction of a second. It was a charity ward, and you just bit the hand that was feeding you. Judge Thorne banged her gavel, order. She looked at Viola with a gaze that could strip paint. Mrs. Williams, you are on very thin ice, the judge said. You sit there, and you listen. Viola collapsed back into her chair, sobbing silently. The judge turned to me. Ms. Williams, you have provided the court with a deed proving ownership and a lease agreement signed by the petitioners. You have provided audio evidence of harassment and attempted subordination of perjury. The court finds that the lease is valid and the breach is substantial. She turned to the CPS attorney. The petitioners, Otis and Viola Williams, currently reside in a property from which they are being evicted for cause. They have no other assets. They have no other residence. She looked at the empty chair where Otis had sat, and then at the weeping Viola. Therefore, the court finds that the grandparents cannot provide a stable home environment. They are effectively homeless pending this eviction. They lack the resources and the moral standing to act as guardians for 3 vulnerable children. She picked up her pen and signed the order. The scratching sound was loud in the quiet room. Petition for kinship, guardianship denied. The judge declared, the children, Leo Maya and Ruby Williams, will remain in the custody of Child Protective Services until a suitable long-term placement can be determined. No, Viola wailed. My grandbabies? Please? You should have thought about your grandbabies before you tried to destroy your daughter, Judge Thorne said, closing the file. This hearing is adjourned. The bailiff moved toward Viola. Ma'am, you need to leave. Viola stood up shakily. She looked at me. Her eyes were not angry anymore. They were empty. She looked like a woman who had woken up in a burning house and realized she was the one holding the matches. Kendra, she whispered. Where will we go? I stepped down from the witness stand. I gathered my binder. I put my tablet in my bag. I did not look at her. That is a risk you should have assessed, Mother. I said, walking past her. I hear there are shelters downtown. Or maybe you can stay with Marcus. Oh, wait. He is in a cell. I walked out of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off her sobs. I walked down the marble hallway, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. I was alone. I had no parents. I had no brother. But I had my dignity. I had my truth. And I had my house back. It was over. The safety net was gone, and gravity was finally taking hold. The sound of the gavel striking the woodblock was not a sharp crack, but a heavy final thud that seemed to seal the coffin on my brother's life. We were back in the criminal division courtroom 3 days later for the sentencing hearing. The plea deal had been rejected. The evidence was too overwhelming, and the public outcry too loud for the district attorney to offer leniency. Marcus stood before the judge, his orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on his frame, his hands trembling behind his back. The judge looked down at him with zero sympathy. Marcus Williams, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of child abandonment in the 2nd degree, and 1 count of reckless endangerment. You displayed a callous disregard for the safety of your own children, prioritizing a vacation over their well-being. You fled the state while a storm endangered their lives. Marcus hung his head. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream where he was the king only to find himself a pauper in chains. I sentenced you to 12 months in the county correctional facility, followed by 3 years of probation, the judge declared. Furthermore, you are hereby branded a felon. This conviction will remain on your permanent record. You are ordered to complete 500 hours of community service and attend mandatory parenting classes before you can even petition for supervised visitation. A felony. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. In the corporate world, Marcus pretended to belong to a felony was a death sentence. He would never get a white-collar job again. He would never work in sales. He would never work in finance. He was unhireable. The golden boy who had always believed the world owed him a living was now officially a liability. Becky stood next to him. Her sentence was lighter due to her cooperation in the final hours, but she still received 6 months of house arrest and probation. But Becky was not looking at the judge. She was looking at Marcus with eyes full of cold calculation. As the bailiff moved to take Marcus away, Becky spoke up, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. "Wait," she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded envelope. Marcus turned to her, hope flickering in his eyes. "Babe," he whispered. "Call my mom. Tell her to fix this." "I am not calling anyone, Marcus," Becky said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I am not waiting for you." She tossed the envelope onto the defense table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of his handcuffed hands. "What is this?" Marcus asked. "Divorce papers," Becky said. "My lawyer filed them this morning. I am not staying married to a felon, Marcus. I am not going to be the wife of a man who cannot provide. I am taking what is left of the assets, and I am moving back to my parents' house in Savannah. Do not call me. Do not write me. We are done." Marcus stared at the envelope. He looked like he had been slapped. "Becky," he stammered. "Becky, please. You cannot leave me here. I did this for us. I did this for our anniversary. You did this because you are a loser," Becky spat. "And I am done carrying you." She turned on her heel and walked out of the courtroom. Her head held high, the ultimate survivor leaving the sinking ship without a backward glance. Marcus let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the walls as the bailiffs dragged him through the side door toward the holding cells. He was alone. His wife was gone. His children were gone. His future was gone. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I felt a strange sense of holiness. It was not joy. It was just the feeling of a equation finally balancing out. The risk had been assessed, the loss had been mitigated, and the file was closed. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright, harsh light of the atrium. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from the smell of government buildings and ruined lives. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor, a steady rhythm of departure. "Kendra." The voice was shrill and desperate. I did not stop. I knew who it was. I pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the parking lot. The Georgia sun beating down on the asphalt, creating waves of heat that distorted the air. "Kendra, wait. Please." I heard the frantic scuffling of footsteps behind me. I stopped at my car, a sleek silver Mercedes sedan that I had bought with my bonus last year. I unlocked the door, but before I could get in, a hand grabbed my arm. It was my mother, Viola. She was out of breath, her face streaked with tears and sweat. My father, Otis, was right behind her, panting, clutching his chest. They looked like refugees from a disaster zone. Their clothes were rumpled, their eyes wild with panic. They had been evicted that morning. The sheriff had come at 8:00 a.m. and given them 15 minutes to gather their essentials before locking the doors of 452 Maple Street. "Kendra, please," Viola gasped, falling to her knees right there on the hot pavement. She grabbed the hem of my skirt, her fingers digging into the fabric. "You cannot leave us. You cannot do this." I looked down at her. This was the woman who had told me my career was meaningless. This was the woman who had demanded I sacrifice my future for her son. Now she was kneeling in a parking lot, ruining her stockings, begging for the very thing she had tried to destroy. "Get up, mother," I said, my voice cold. You are making a scene. I do not care about a scene, she wailed. We have nowhere to go. Kendra? The sheriff locked us out. They changed the locks. All our things are inside. We have no money. We have no family. You are our daughter. You have to help us. Otis stepped forward, his hands shaking. Kendra, look at us. We are old people. We cannot live on the street. We cannot go to a shelter. We are respectable people. Respectable. I laughed a short, sharp sound. Respectable people do not cover up crimes, Dad. Respectable people do not try to frame their daughter. Respectable people do not steal from their children to feed a gambling addiction. I made a mistake, Otis pleaded, tears leaking from his eyes. I was desperate. I was trying to save the family. I thought I was doing the right thing. Please, Kendra, just let us back in the house. We will sign anything. We will do anything. Just give us a place to sleep. I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had raised me. I remembered the years of neglect, the years of being second best, the years of being the safety net they never acknowledged. I remembered the phone call in the hotel room. So what if you lose your job, Kendra? It is just a job. They had been willing to burn my life to the ground to keep Marcus warm. And now that Marcus was in ashes, they wanted to come into my house and warm themselves by my fire. No, I said. Viola looked up at me, her face a mask of shock. What? No, I repeated. I am not letting you back in. I am not giving you money. I am not saving you, but we are your parents. She screamed, clutching my skirt tighter. We gave you life. You owe us. I reached down and peeled her fingers off my skirt one by one. Her grip was weak. I owe you nothing, I said. You spent my inheritance on Marcus. You spent my love on Marcus. You spent my loyalty on Marcus. You made your investment. Now you have to live with the returns. Con-Oi Otis sobbed, using the childhood nickname he hadn't used in 20 years. Please, don't be cruel. We have nobody else. Where will we go? I opened my car door. I looked at them one last time, etching this image into my mind. My parents kneeling in the dirt, stripped of their pride, stripped of their lies, stripped of their power. You were ready to sacrifice me to save Marcus. I said, my voice low and hard. You told me my life didn't matter. You told me I was disposable. Well, you made your choice. You chose him. I pointed toward the courthouse jail. So go live with Marcus, go ask him for help. Oh wait, I forgot. He is going to prison, and he has nothing to give you because he never did. Viola let out a sound of pure anguish, a wail that tore through the parking lot. She collapsed onto the asphalt, sobbing into her hands. Otis just stood there, swaying slightly, as if the wind had been knocked out of him. I got into my car. I closed the door, shutting out the heat and the noise. I started the engine. The air conditioning blasted cool air against my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I put the car in reverse. I looked in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. They were still there. Two small figures alone in the middle of a vast empty parking lot. They looked like ghosts. Ghosts of a past I had finally exorcised. I drove out of the lot and merged onto the highway, heading toward my penthouse, toward my career, toward my life. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, letting the hum of the engine be the only sound. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away impatiently. It was not a tear of regret. It was a tear of relief. It was the final drop of poison leaving my system. I had lost my family. But I had found myself. And as I watched the Atlanta skyline rise up before me, shining and strong, I knew that I would never be anyone's doormat again. I was Kendra Williams. I was the owner of Bluebird LLC. And I was finally free. 3 months have passed since the gavel fell and severed the rotting limb that was my family tree. The silence in my life since that day has not been empty. It has been full. Full of peace. Full of productivity, full of the kind of clean, organized quiet that I had craved since I was a child, hiding in my room to escape my mother's criticism. I sat in the conference room of David's law firm, reviewing the final documents for the guardianship of Leo, Maya, and Ruby. The state had done its job. They had found a kinship placement that did not involve my parents. Her name was Beatrice. She was a distant cousin on my father's side. A woman who had been ostracized by the family years ago because she refused to lend Otis money for a business scheme that inevitably failed. She lived in a small weathered house in Savannah. She was a school librarian. She had no money, but she had a surplus of integrity. She had stepped forward the moment she heard about the arrest, offering her home. Not because she wanted the kids' trust fund, there wasn't one. Or because she wanted glory, but because she simply could not bear the thought of them in the system. I looked at the photos the social worker had sent. Leo was smiling. A real smile. not the anxious people-pleasing grimace he used to wear around Marcus. Maya and Ruby were playing in a garden that looked wild and overgrown and magical. They looked safe. "Is everything in order?" David asked, sitting across from me. I picked up my pen. The documents in front of me were not for public record. They were the charter for the violently anonymous trust I was establishing. The Skyward Trust, I read aloud. "The beneficiaries are Leo Maya and Ruby Williams. The trustee is your firm." "Correct," David said. "The terms are exactly as you specified. Full tuition for private schools in Savannah. A monthly stipend for Beatrice that covers all food, clothing, and housing costs, plus a salary for her caretaking. Medical and dental insurance fully paid. And a college fund for each child that vests when they turn 25, provided they attend financial literacy counseling." "And the anonymity clause?" I asked. "Ironclad," David assured me. "Beatrice knows there is a benefactor, but she does not know it is you. The checks come from the trust. All communication goes through my office. As far as she knows, the money is a state grant or a charitable donation. Marcus and your parents will never know. They cannot guilt you. They cannot use the kids as leverage to get to your wallet." I nodded and signed the papers. The ink flowed smoothly onto the page. It was the most expensive signature of my life, costing me a significant percentage of my yearly bonus and investment dividends. But it was also the most valuable. I was buying their freedom. And I was buying my own. I could not raise them. I knew that about myself. I was a career woman. I traveled. I valued my solitude. If I had taken them in, I would have resented the disruption, and they would have felt it. They would have grown up knowing they were a burden just like I had. I would not do that to them. Beatrice would give them the time and the softness I could not. I would give them the resources and the security Marcus never would. It was a partnership. A silent, invisible partnership. "Make sure Beatrice gets the first check by Friday," I said, handing the folder back to David. "Leo needs braces. And Maya wants to take violin lessons. Make it happen." "Consider it done," David said. "You are a good Aunt Kendra." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "I am a good risk analyst, David. I identified a liability, and I turned it into an asset. These kids are the future. I am just hedging my bets." David smiled. He knew me well enough to know that was my way of saying I loved them. I left his office and drove my Mercedes through the bustling streets of Atlanta. The city looked different to me now. Brighter, sharper. For years I had driven these streets with a low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. The dread of the next phone call. The fear of the next crisis. The weight of my family's expectations dragging behind me like a parachute. Now the parachute was cut. I was flying. I pulled into the private garage of my building. The biometric scanner read my retina and the heavy gates slid open. I parked in my reserved spot. There were no oil stains from my brother's leaky car. There were no scratches on the wall from his careless driving. It was pristine. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into my foyer. Colonel Johnson was already there, standing on my balcony, looking out at the sunset. He was wearing a crisp linen shirt and holding 2 glasses of a deep red Cabernet. He turned when he heard me enter. "Report, soldier," he said, his voice gruff, but his eyes warm. "Mission accomplished," I said, dropping my keys in the bowl. "The trust is funded. The kids are secure. Beatrice has the resources she needs." The colonel nodded approvingly. He walked over and handed me a glass of wine. "Good work," he said. "You secured the perimeter. You protected the innocent. That is all anyone can ask." I took the glass and walked with him back out to the balcony. The air was cool for Atlanta, a gentle breeze blowing in from the mountains. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the city turn from gold to twilight blue. Colonel Johnson had become a fixture in my life over the last 3 months. After the trial, he had reached out not to ask for anything but to check on me. We had started meeting for coffee, then dinner. I discovered that beneath his military exterior was a man who had lost his own daughter to addiction years ago. He had tried to save her and failed. Helping me save Leo, Maya, and Ruby was his redemption. He was the father I should have had. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't criticize my career. He respected my strength. He told me when I was wrong and praised me when I was right. He was honorable. "Have you heard from them?" he asked quietly. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was rich and complex, grounding me. "Otis sent a letter to David's office," I said. "He is living in a studio apartment in East Point. Viola is staying with her sister in Alabama. They are separated. He wanted me to know he is looking for work." And I asked. And he asked if I could spare $500 for a suit for interviews. The colonel snorted, shaking his head. "Some people never change. They just change tactics. I told David to send him a list of local charities that provide clothing for job seekers. I said. I did not send the money. Good, the colonel said. You cannot water a dead plant and expect it to grow. You just make mud. We leaned against the railing. Below us, the traffic on Peachtree Street was a river of light. Marcus is in processing, I said. He starts his sentence next week. Becky moved back to Savannah with her parents. She is filing for full custody once he is inside. But with her record, she won't get it. The state prefers Beatrice. So the threats are neutralized, the colonel said. The board is clear. Yes, I said. The board is clear. I looked at him. You know, Colonel, people say blood is thicker than water. They use it to guilt you into staying in toxic situations. The colonel swirled his wine. The actual quote is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, he said. It means the bonds you choose, the promises you make, are stronger than the biology you are born into. I smiled. That is exactly what I mean. You are my family now, Colonel. You and Beatrice and the kids and David. You are the people who respect me. You are the people who show up. The colonel clinked his glass against mine. To family, he said. The one we build. To family, I echoed. My phone buzzed on the table beside us. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the peaceful evening. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from my blocked messages folder. My phone automatically filtered them, but let me know they existed. Senator Marcus. Preview K. Please answer. I am scared. They are transferring me to the state facility. I need money for commissary. Mom said, you have millions. Don't do this to me. I am your big brother. Remember when we used to play in the yard? You owe me. Just answer. I stared at the words. A year ago, that text would have ruined my night. I would have felt the old familiar claw of guilt in my gut. I would have remembered the little boy who used to share his candy with me before he learned he could just take mine. I would have wondered if I was being too hard. I would have opened my wallet just to make the pain stop. But tonight, I felt nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel the urge to reply. It was like reading a text from a stranger who had the wrong number. Marcus was a ghost. He was a character in a story I had finished reading. His fear was real, I was sure. But it was his fear. He had bought it, paid for it, and now he owned it. It was not my inventory. I looked at the colonel, who was watching me with a protective gaze, ready to step in if I wavered. Is everything okay? He asked. I picked up the phone. It is just spam, I said. I didn't delete the message. I didn't need to. It was already in the trash where it belonged. I held the power button down. The screen went black. The little white Apple logo faded away. The buzzing stopped. The connection was severed. I set the phone back on the table face down. I looked out at the city. The lights were dazzling, millions of lives playing out in the grid below. Somewhere down there, my parents were learning to live within their means. Somewhere down there, my brother was learning to live within a cell. And up here in the cool, clean air, I was learning to live for myself. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of jasmine from my balcony garden and the ochia aroma of the wine. I am more than okay, Colonel, I said, smiling as I turned my back on the city and the phone and the past. I am finally free. We stood there as the stars came out. Two soldiers who had survived the war, sipping wine in the quiet victory of the aftermath. The night was silent, and it was beautiful. The most profound lesson I learned is that blood does not automatically equal family. For years I sacrificed my dignity to buy the love of people who viewed me only as a resource. I realized that true family is not defined by biology but by respect, integrity, and who stands beside you when the storm breaks. Setting boundaries with toxic relatives isn't an act of cruelty. It is a necessary act of survival. I had to lose the family I was born into to find the peace I deserved. Proving that sometimes your chosen family is the strongest bond of all. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.